The horrifying reality of living under the Emperor's children is worse than any nightmare you can imagine. I know because I lived it. My name is Javen Hale. Once I was just a data worker in our city's administration. Now I am the last witness. When their purple and gold ships appeared in our skies, we welcomed them with celebrations. We did not understand that their perfect faces hid monsters beneath. The screams of my neighbors became their favorite music. Human bodies were carved into living instruments that played melodies of pain. Those of us who survived learned to move like rats through the shadows of our broken city, always listening for the sound of their processions. The worst part was not the killing. It was how they made beauty from our suffering, turned our agony into art that could entrance even as it destroyed. I thought I could hide forever. I was wrong. What happens when the very gods of excess claim not just your flesh, but your reality itself? My name is Javen Hale, though names mean little now in Civitas, the city of 1,000 pleasures. That is what they renamed our capital after the fall. Before their coming, I worked as a municipal data collector, tracking resource distribution for our governor. A small life, but mine. We had heard rumors of the Great Crusade, whispers of compliance and the Emperor's light. We prepared celebrations for when his warriors would arrive, not knowing which of his legions would claim us. When the ships appeared in orbit, they bore the purple and gold of the Emperor's children, the perfectionist sons of Fulgrim, known across the galaxy for their precision and glory. We lined the streets. We sang hymns of welcome. Some wept with joy. Our musical muse prepared their finest works, knowing this legion's appreciation for such things. The first drop pods crashed through our atmosphere on a clear morning. I remember how the sunlight caught on their armor as they emerged, iridescent and beautiful. Their weapons stayed holstered. Their voices were melodic when they spoke, each word precisely chosen. They requested our leaders come forward to discuss terms of peaceful compliance. I watched from my hab window as our governor and his council approached the Legion commander. The warrior removed his helmet, revealing a face of such impossible symmetry and grace that many gasped. I remember thinking that surely we were blessed to be welcomed by such perfect examples of humanity. I did not see the blade that took our governor's head. I only saw the fountain of crimson that followed, and heard the strange, pleased sigh that escaped the legionnaire's lips as the blood splashed across his armor. What came next happened with such speed and deliberate grace that it seemed choreographed, as if they had practiced the movements 1,000 times. The white marble streets of our processional avenue became slick with blood. The screams rose like a chorus, and the warriors began to move differently, their bodies swaying as if keeping time with the sounds of terror. Some began to sing, their voices impossibly beautiful, harmonizing with the death cries of our people. I ran through service tunnels and maintenance shafts. I made my way home and gathered what supplies I could: food, water, my identification documents, though these would soon become worthless. From my high window, I could see the Legion moving through the city, their progress marked by rising smoke and strange-colored lights that pulsed in patterns that hurt my eyes. That was 3 years ago. I live now in the shadows of what was once Administratum District 6. Most buildings stand empty, their inhabitants processed for whatever entertainments the Legion devised. Those of us who remain have learned to move like vermin, silent and unseen. We are not resistance, we are not rebels, we are simply those who have not yet been caught. I keep this record because I must believe someone will find it someday, that someone will know what happened here, that our suffering will be witnessed even if it cannot be avenged. This is not a tale of heroism. There are no heroes in Civitas Voluptas. There is only survival and what we surrender to achieve it. My first months in hiding were spent alone, moving from one abandoned hab to another, staying ahead of the patrols. I learned their rhythms, the strange rituals that dictated their movements through the city. They did not hunt us constantly. That would be too simple, too merciful. Instead, they staged great spectacles, processions they called revelations, where they would sweep through a district and capture any survivors they found. I witnessed one such revelation from the ventilation crawl space of what had been a medic facility. They moved in perfect formation, their armor no longer the proud purple and gold of the Emperor's children, but twisted into configurations that defied reason. Some had modified their armor to expose flesh beneath, skin covered in swirling tattoos that seemed to move. Some marched with eerie autonomy. Additional ones sported audio enhancers that amplified their slightest steps, their inhalations, swelling them into deafening roars. They herded a line of shackled townsfolk ahead, linked not by iron links, but by what looked like sinew and neural strands throbbing with eerie vitality. The prisoners advanced in an odd, harmonious rhythm, their footfalls aligned flawlessly amid their dread. Laggards weren't executed. Rather, a fighter would draw near, carrying a compact metallic box. He'd withdraw a flask of iridescent fluid and compel the prisoner to swallow it. The results hit instantly and nightmarishly. The victim's form would twist, skeletal frame snapping as it reformed, flesh pulling taut and tearing to expose budding protrusions underneath. Yet throughout the ordeal, their minds stayed alert. It showed in their gazes, the comprehension, the grasp of their fate. A few howled, some pleaded, others chuckled, their mirth more chilling than any agonized wail. I observed as one lady, roughly my years, underwent the change. Her digits stretched into tendrils, akin to the cords of a nightmarish device. Her torso unfurled like blooming florets, unveiling pulmonary matter remolded into bellow-like structures. A member of the cohort neared her, gliding a curved tool over her digit cords. The tone that arose was exquisite, eerily captivating, a tune that welled tears in my eyes while churning my gut. "Flawless," the soldier murmured, his tone boosted by his helmet's emitter. "You'll perform in the vast chorus. Your timbre will blend into the uproar of ecstasy." The column pressed on, and I stayed concealed, my palm clamped over my lips to mute any noise. It took hours for them to pass my shelter. Only afterward did I permit myself to inhale, to sob, to tremble from the atrocity I'd seen. That evening, rest eluded me. The harmony from the woman's altered frame lingered in my thoughts. I caught myself murmuring it, then halted and gnawed my tongue till blood filled my mouth. This was their dominion, I grasped. Beyond mere bodily defilement, it was their knack for forging a lure from terror, for transmuting the sacrilegious into something that stirred the spirit. Over the ensuing days, I spotted shifts in the urban landscape. Edifices were being refashioned, their frameworks modified to yield fresh sonic qualities. Vast arenas sprouted in former housing zones, looming broadcasters perched atop pinnacles, emitting noises round the clock. Noises beyond words, swinging from shrill howls to harmonies so ravishing they could halt your pulse. I took to plugging my ears with scraps from deserted homes. It muffled the din, but failed to silence it fully. Certain pitches evaded the ears themselves, vibrating straight through my cranium's framework, my torso's hollows. Provisions grew rare. The cohort cared little for sustaining logistics or crop yields. Their fighters appeared to forego human-style sustenance. The remaining supply hubs were snares, spots where the starving congregated, only to be reaped for the cohort's perverse designs. I endured on reserves of crisis provisions unearthed in forsaken guard stations, on mold cultivated in watery shadows where I sheltered. At times, I'd encounter fellow holdouts like myself, scraping by in obscurity. We'd exchange goods if possible, intel invariably, yet we'd part swiftly. Clusters drew notice more readily, and the cohort had means to extract betrayals from the seized. One fellow I encountered, a technician called Drusus, had been charting the cohort's paths, seeking sense in their frenzy. He thought their chaos held rationale, a scheme that, if decoded, could forecast their routes, pinpoint safe windows for travel. "They're crafting an opus," he confided, his words a raspy murmur as we huddled amid a filtration facility's debris. Beyond abductions or slaughters, every element, the audio, the constructs they're erecting, the mutations, it's all threads in a larger tapestry. I pressed him on it. What goal could such capricious brutality fulfill? Not capricious, he countered, intentional, conducted like a score. They're harmonizing the metropolis as if it were a grand apparatus, and we're the tones they aim to evoke. 3 days on, I discovered Drusus's remains, or the fragments left. He'd been splayed from neck to pelvis, viscera excised and supplanted by gadgets that ticked on relentlessly post-mortem. His jaws had been stitched agape, locked in eternal anguish, and from them issued a gentle, unending note, akin to a reed instrument swayed by breezes. Draped at his throat was a tag etched in elegant lettering, the discordant, "They come back," changed. I laid him to rest as well as I managed in the yielding soil of a former ornamental garden. I gathered his journals, his charts, his records of the Legion's patrols. Not every technical detail made sense to me, but I started to discern the trends he'd spotted. Some neighborhoods buzzed with activity during set hours. Particular structures served dedicated roles. The Legion had segmented the metropolis into zones they labeled movements, each carrying its unique motif, its signature flavor of terror. The initial movement, the business quarter, featured their so-called sensation bazaars, where prisoners endured intensifying trials of agony and ecstasy. The next, our old arts hub, now contained the alteration exhibits, sites of profound bodily alterations. The third, the manufacturing zone, transformed into an enormous forge where Legion creators built fresh tools of torment masked as masterpieces. This pattern persisted. Every area refashioned to support some facet of their overarching scheme. Deuce had pinpointed 8 such movements altogether, plus a 9th in progress amid the ruins of our main government hub. I started leveraging this knowledge to move through the streets with greater caution, syncing my outings to periods when the Legion's focus shifted away. It was on one of those meticulously timed forays, scavenging pharmaceuticals from a deserted medical outpost, that I crossed paths with Maris. She'd previously been a surgeon focused on battlefield injuries. These days, she ran a modest hidden operation, aiding survivors when possible and offering comfort to the hopeless. She'd set up her outpost in the basement of a toppled housing tower, with the debris overhead offering camouflage and a shield. Quote 101. She explained while addressing a spreading mold on my shoulder blades. Quote 2 loose. Her movements were soft, her examination detached and professional, yet it marked the first genuine human interaction I'd known in ages that stemmed from neither panic nor survival instinct. Before I knew it, I was recounting Deuce's story to her, describing his diagrams and ideas. Quote 3. She replied, poring over the documents I'd carried. They're constructing something monumental. The metropolis is morphing into a device and we're turning into its notes. But for whose benefit? She brought me into contact with fellow refugees under her care. An ex-orchestra leader from our symphony, an audio technician from the Vox transmission stations, a numbers expert who'd taught at our leading academy. As a team, they'd been analyzing the Legion's operations, probing the rhythms, the intent fueling the insanity. The orchestra leader, a gaunt fellow by the name of Gallus whose hands fidgeted endlessly like they were tracing an invisible rhythm, outlined their conclusions. Quote 5. He murmured, his tone hushed. Quote, the concept escaped me. I lacked background in those realms. I'd only ever viewed the warp as the pathway starfarers used for interstellar jumps, no deeper than that. The numbers expert, Lorelei, attempted to break it down accessibly. Picture existence as a tapestry, she suggested. In its usual state, it's densely interlaced, isolating us from whatever lurks outside. Yet, specific designs, particular pitches and shapes can fray that weave, generating echoes that permit crossings. Quote 7. I pressed. The audio technician, Thax, a guy who'd swapped out one eye for a cybernetic logger, responded. Presences, creatures, the entities dwelling in the voids amid voids, the deities they revere. It struck me as lunacy, mere ghost stories for the young. Still, after witnessing so many unreal events since the Legion descended, I couldn't wholly brush off their claims. Quote 9. I inquired. Quote 10. They shared looks, a wordless exchange forged from shared trials. Quote 11. Maris concluded at last. Quote 12. That's how I became part of their tight-knit group, their band of chroniclers. We set up a monitoring network, drawing on Deuce's layouts to station sentinels at vital spots across the sprawl. We captured the sights and sounds, assembling an archive of the Legion's deeds, their ceremonies, their reshaping of both the urban framework and its lingering inhabitants. Our records resist easy summation. The Legion had started staging what they dubbed presentations, intricate displays blending sacred rites, dramatic displays, and communal cruelties. These took place, I say, in the freshly built arenas, where imprisoned spectators sat in circular tiers encircling a focal platform. From a hidden vantage in the upper tiers of one such venue, Thax observed the Legion staging what they called the Symphony of Ascension. 50 prisoners were led onto the platform, each altered in some nightmarish way. Certain ones sported additional appendages, while others endured senses amplified beyond conceivable limits. Eyes proliferated across their faces, ears contorted into intricate coils draping the sides of their skulls. The Legion's maestro, a fighter whose plating mimicked a bursting torso with skeletal spikes jutting every which way, commanded them into a meticulous geometric arrangement on the platform. Upon his cue, they started shifting, emitting sounds, interacting like musical tools, uniting as an ensemble. The noises they generated kicked off as jarring chaos, excruciating to the ears. Gradually, though, as the show progressed, the cacophony coalesced into a chord, the individual elements merging into a cohesive whole. The crowd, mixing Legion soldiers and seized locals, grew restlessly animated. A few started rocking in place, others muttering in unknown dialects. Crimson streamed from the orifices of numerous onlookers. Then arrived the peak. The director lifted his arms, now morphed into slender razor-sharp extensions, and slashed them downward in one sharp motion. In that instant, all the artists on stage experienced an abrupt metamorphosis. Their forms appeared to melt, blending into a unified blob of tissue and perception. Cries morphed into sighs, then into melody. A tune that, according to Thax, triggered hallucinations of surreal terrains and entities of unfathomable forms. At the heart of this amalgamation, a fissure materialized, a gash in the atmosphere itself. From it spilled an illumination that wasn't truly light, a glow that obscured instead of brightening. And out of this fissure stepped an entity. Thax's capture gear malfunctioned right there, his cybernetic optic exploding in its casing. He bolted away, scarcely surviving, his psyche splintered by the sight he'd caught. Back at our refuge, he stayed mute for several days. When he at last regained speech, his words were limited to, "It's approaching." The Prince of Pleasure has fixed his attention on us. In the ensuing weeks, the Legion ramped up their operations. Additional sectors were remade, more residents seized and reforged. The audio emanating from the urban spires evolved, growing more intricate, more compelling, infiltrating slumbers and conscious minds equally. Gallus fell first among us. We discovered him at dawn, his frame twisted into an inconceivable form, limbs wrenched from sockets and repositioned at bizarre inclinations, his lips pulled wide in an expression that blurred torment and bliss, hard to distinguish. Gripped in his fist lay a sheet of musical notation. The symbols deviated from any standard method, the strokes evoking gashes more than pitches. Lorelei examined it prior to incinerating it with Gallus's corpse. "It's a snippet," she noted, "part of a grander score." He was etching down the echoes he perceived. We relocated our haven afterward, forsaking the underground air filtration plant at the urban periphery. The atmosphere lingered heavy with toxic remnants, scorching the respiratory tract and irritating the vision. Yet the constant hum of the operational devices aided in muffling the metropolitan transmissions. Our ranks shrank. Thax vanished on a scouting run, abandoning just his gear. The visuals revealed mere interference and fleeting fragmented glimpses of visages smooshed against the camera's surface, as though striving to burst free from the apparatus. Lorelei endured further, her analytical intellect maybe shielding her somewhat from the forces saturating the metropolis. But numbers could only guard so well. One evening, she commenced sketching formulas across the surfaces, elaborate calculations whirling from a core hub. When Maris attempted to intervene, Lorelei lashed out, her features alight with fervent insight. "The design is finished," she declared, her tone infused with overtones no mortal larynx could muster. "The formula equates. Nothing left but the ultimate validation." She ended herself before we could hold her back, employing a fragment of shattered pain to slice her arteries. As her vital fluid poured, it traced the paths of her computations, saturating them like conduits crafted expressly for that flow. Now merely Maris and I persisted, dual observers amid urban nightmares. We pressed on with our records, our watchfulness, despite uncertainty over its purpose. The Legion's efforts neared their apex. It towered above every structure that had ever risen on our world. At the summit, a crystalline pinnacle captured the sunlight, splintering it into shafts of unearthly hues that danced over the skyline. "It's a signal," Maris murmured from our latest refuge as we watched it gleam, like a lighthouse piercing the void. The Legion had declared their ultimate show, dubbing it the climax of unity. Messengers swept the streets, their announcements booming into the remotest shelters, declaring everyone summoned, everyone embraced, everyone essential to the epic conclusion of their mission. We realized the finale loomed, that their scheme was about to unfold. We rushed our safeguards, collecting the records we'd amassed, encasing them in vaults built for the harshest trials. Maris was convinced rescuers would arrive someday, Imperial reinforcements, maybe lured by the eerie quiet from a planet cut off from the stars. "They have to learn the truth," she urged. "They need to grasp the Legion's evolution, the entity they worship." The evening prior to the climax, Maris approached with a vial brimming with transparent fluid. "For compassion," she clarified. "Should they seize us if escape vanishes, it's swift and as gentle as survival allows here." I accepted it, slipping it inside the lining of my frayed administratum robe. The material, formerly a symbol of honor, now draped in soiled shreds over my gaunt form. Yet I wore it still. A fragment of self refused to let go of the role it evoked. Jorvan Hale, bureaucrat, resident, mortal. That dusk, amid our last arrangements, the Legion launched their parade across the urban sprawl. From our remote overlook, the rumble reached us clearly. A rhythmic tread that vibrated the earth, climbing through our boots, settling in our skeletons and jaws. Accompanying it was melody, or whatever term fit the eerie symphony saturating the atmosphere. It was mesmerizing and horrifying, a symphony that tugged at buried instincts, voicing unspoken cravings, unnamed appetites. Maris pressed her temples, her features twisting in agony. "Tune it out," she wheezed. "Concentrate on anything, something mundane." But nothing remained. The harmony devoured every noise, every notion. It offered solutions to riddles I'd ignored, delights I'd never conjured. I felt an urge pulling me to our shelter's exit, an irresistible pull beyond my grasp. Maris seized my wrist, nails biting skin with frantic force. "Quote 18, she uttered, the word echoing from afar. "Jorvan, administer the vial immediately, before it's irreversible." I gazed at her, this sole ally in our fractured reality, and noticed she'd already injected herself. Her eyes widened, breaths grew shallow. She offered a true smile, free of frenzy or sorrow. Quote 19. She breathed, then she collapsed, lifeless on the ground. I ought to have mirrored her choice. I should have embraced the relief she'd offered. But instead, I crossed over her still form and ventured into the darkness, lured by the tune's seductive summons. The avenues brimmed with figures, holdouts like me, concealed for cycles or longer, now converging as a single mass toward the towering edifice. Their expressions mirrored my own drive, the shared surrender to the summons. A few cried while advancing, others joined the chorus, their tones weaving fresh layers into the score. I strode with them, merged yet detached enough to note, to etch mentally the spectacle unfolding. This, I reasoned, defined my role: to perceive, to retain, to testify. As Maris had implored in her final exhale, the throng directed us to the foot of the coiled tower, where massive portals yawned wide, throbbing with radiance synced to the rhythm. Legion sentinels flanked the entrance, their gear so altered they scarcely evoked the noble Astartes who first invaded our domain. Flesh fused with metal, fused with gadgets and broadcasters, fused with arcane tools. They permitted our passage without hindrance, without words or recognition, merely steering us deeper into the heart. The building's innards mocked conventional design, voids stretching where walls should pinch, paths circling in defying loops. At length, we stepped into an immense arena, vaster than physics permitted inside those bounds. Row after row of benches encircled a focal platform, occupied by multitudes, some still resembling people, others warped beyond faint human echoes. I was directed to a spot, limbs obeying as thoughts raged in muted rebellion. Flanking me were fellow stragglers from the parade filtered in, their faces twisted between horror and wild expectation. Atop the platform loomed a solitary form, a Legion leader whose protective gear had been twisted into an outfit evoking a symphony director's elegant suit. If that suit consisted of writhing skin and agonized visages, his headpiece was absent, exposing a visage of flawless, dreadful allure, its contours so balanced it pained the eyes to behold. He lifted his arms, and the mounting sounds halted abruptly, plunging the area into a hush so deep I detected my pulse thumping, the surge of blood through my arteries. Quote 20, he intoned, his words echoing across the enormous arena without any mechanical aid. Quote 21, Jorvin. Quote 22, Alara. Quote 23, what did they do to you? Quote 24, they elevated me. Quote 25, they enabled me to perceive the symphony in its true form, and now I assist them in locating those requiring elevation. Quote 26, a raw subject. Quote 27, seize him. Quote 28, a pristine example. Quote 29, unspoiled, untouched, an empty slate saved for this ideal instant. Quote 30, ready him. Quote 31, no. Quote 32, this can't be. The math was precise, the vibrations flawless. From the other side of the fissure emerged a tone so deeply discordant it inflicted bodily agony on everyone present. Spectators gripped their heads, necks, and torsos as though the noise was a tangible intruder invading their forms. The maestro dropped to his knees, crimson trickling from his eyes, nostrils, and ears. "My master," he choked out, "we've let you down. Pardon us. Show us how to fix our mistake." Quote 35. The deity spurned us. Quote 36. Our efforts fell short. Air quote for 37. He extended a limb more claw than hand. Uot in 38. He begged. Niupudi 39. I regarded him, this creature who had unleashed such nightmares on my reality, who had twisted life into a trial of feeling and degradation. No compassion stirred in me, no leniency, just an icy, unyielding resolve. Quote 40. I replied, my altered larynx producing an unfamiliar timbre. Quote 41. I abandoned him amid the pandemonium of the arena. The edifice itself was crumbling, its bizarre structures losing coherence as the distortion powers that upheld them evaporated. Sections of the roof plummeted, smashing those beneath. Surfaces swelled and gave way, surfaces undulated and fractured. The crowd bolted, those still able. Some, warped too severely by the guards' prior efforts, dragged or writhed toward doorways that twisted and migrated as the venue's core principles unraveled. Others fell victim to the stampede, limbs pulverized under the rush. I pressed counter to the flow, my modified physique granting vigor and toughness beyond my former limits. No specific goal guided me, only an urgent impulse to flee, persist, and recount what followed. I located a way out, an opening. This path opened not into hallways, but straight out to the foot of the towering spiral edifice. The metropolis in the distance lay in chaos. The signal boosters and transmission spires were spewing erratic blasts of cacophonous sound, scattered bits of the melody that had permeated the atmosphere before. Structures warped by the Legion's influence were crumbling or shifting once more. Their fresh shapes deviated even further from the principles of physics. Overhead, the crystalline pinnacle crowning the spiral formation was splintering. Fragments plummeted onto the urban sprawl beneath. Every piece snagged and bent the sunlight, hurling rays of surreal hues across the sky as if they were tangible blades, carving through anything in their path. I navigated alleys clogged with rubble and corpses, beyond displays of frantic escape and nightmarish metamorphosis. Certain residents, partially reshaped by the Legion, were regressing toward human shapes, seldom fully and always at a steep price. The rest, with deeper mutations, endured hideous additional shifts, their forms uprising against the clashing forces of warp power and physical existence. Legion troops dotted the urban landscape, a few persisting in their tasks amid the disintegrating scheme, others lashing out at comrades in fury or hopelessness. I saw a soldier whose plating had merged with his skin, morphing him into a monstrous blend of armored alloy and raw tissue, ripping into another warrior with limbs that resembled mechanical vices more than natural limbs. "Flawed," he bellowed amid his frenzy. "Everything flawed. We have to refashion, reconstruct, start over." I steered clear of them whenever possible, concealing myself when evasion failed. My modified physique rendered me less obvious as unaltered, as a viable target for their focus. In their gaze, I could pass for merely another of their creations, one more altered inhabitant, staggering amid the disorder. I pressed onward to the city's fringe, to the air purification plant where Maris and I had set up our final refuge. I can't explain my pullback there. Maybe some primal urge guided me to the sole spot of security I'd felt, no matter how fleeting or conditional. Maybe I just had to verify the truth I already grasped, that Maris was lost, that solitude now defined me utterly. The plant endured as we'd abandoned it, spared from the breakdown ravaging the core districts. The chemical fog enveloping it might have shielded it, rendering it unappealing to the Legion's artistic tastes, too utilitarian, too mechanical for inclusion in their visionary blueprint. I stepped inside, traversing known passages to the room where I'd placed Maurice. Her remains lay serene, her expression locked in that last peaceful grin. I settled next to her, my changed body contorting into shapes that ought to defy logic, ought to hurt, yet now seemed instinctive. "I witnessed it all," I confided to her, despite her deafness to my words. "I beheld everything, the spectacle, the breach, the being. And I watched it spurn their efforts. I watched the whole edifice crumble. I lingered in that space for hours, or maybe days. Measuring time grew elusive. My senses had warped alongside my physique. At last, appetite compelled me onward, to forage for nourishment. The provisions we'd stockpiled remained intact. I consumed them, discovering my revamped innards could handle standard fare, albeit with scant pleasure. In the ensuing days, I occasionally stepped out, surveying the city from afar. The breakdown persisted, a gradual fraying over a swift disaster. The Legion's footprint faded bit by bit. Certain fighters ascended in shuttles to link with ships in the void above. Others vanished outright, likely hunting fresh canvases for their craft, new arenas for their shows. Surviving locals started to surface from cover, salvaging fragments of their urban world, their existences. Countless carried the scars of the Legion's touch, alterations ranging from mild to profound. Their movements had evolved. These remnants clung to dim corners, shunning exposed areas, clustering in tight knots that scattered at the slightest threat. I watched them from my vantage, but held back from approaching. My partial evolution had marked me too profoundly, too evidently branded by the Legion's craft. I dreaded their response, shunning, or worse, adoration, since some were forming sects devoted to the ordeal, to the lingering thrill of the sensations the Legion had unleashed. They convened amid the wreckage of auditoriums, reenacting snippets of the shows, chasing faint traces of that dread rapture. Rather, I stayed within my haven, emerging solely for essentials or to monitor. I documented my observations, my ordeals, etching them down as well as possible with fingers ill-suited for gripping pens. I repurposed scraps from the plant. Technical testimonies came from salvaged manuals, and data slates turned into personal logs. Time wore on for months. The urban sprawl found a fragile equilibrium, yet it could never reclaim its former state following the Legion's incursion. Irreversible shifts had occurred. Profound changes had reshaped countless lives. Amid the debris of the past, novel edifices emerged, peculiar fusions of survival essentials blended with remnants of the Legion's design ethos. The inhabitants adjusted, as humanity invariably does. They forged fresh traditions and societal frameworks to navigate their transformed existence. The most drastically altered individuals banded together into isolated enclaves, devising methods to thrive amid their alterations. Meanwhile, those with subtler modifications strove to revive pre-invasion habits and organizations, setting up bazaars, advisory bodies, and protective forces. From afar, I observed the entirety, a quiet spectator to the complete saga of our planet's desecration and tentative restoration. I recognized that outsiders would eventually arrive. imperial troops, attracted by the hush of a formerly obedient realm, or maybe by emergency broadcasts from locals skilled enough to pierce the void. Upon their landing, they would encounter a society indelibly scarred by the Legion's touch, a metropolis where even the masonry carried traces of their perversion. They would behold the sects, the aberrations, the persistent aura of warp forces. They would render their verdicts, imposing the Emperor's doctrine of cleanliness and uniformity. I anticipated no compassion from these impending enforcers. The Imperium's handling of impurity and contamination stands well chronicled. Flames purify every transgression, yet until that reckoning dawned, I persisted in my vigil, my chronicling. I served as chronicler not merely to the atrocities inflicted upon us, but to our endurance, our reconstruction from the ashes of an idealized era. Precisely 1 year following the botched climax, I edged nearer to the heart of the city than ever before. Whispers from fellow survivors with whom I occasionally bartered pulled me in, tales of stirrings at the demolished helical edifice, stirrings reminiscent of the Legion's rhythms. I advanced with care, traversing the labyrinth of wreckage and forsaken passages I'd charted over my observational tenure. The edifice endured, albeit reduced, its coiled shape partly caved in, the crystalline pinnacle shattered long ago. Yet illumination flickered inside, throbbing in intricate sequences that evoked unwelcome recollections. I secured an overlook within the gutted frame of a former retail spire, employing my enhanced sight to scan the gap ahead. The sight validated my gravest apprehensions. An assembly had convened amid the amphitheater's remnants. Some bore the evident stigmata of the Legion's alterations from the citizenry. Newcomers joined them, perhaps spacer crews from transient ships enticed by murmurs of sublime encounters. And weaving through the crowd, guiding their labors, stood beings clad in violet and aureate plating. Not true Legion soldiers, but mortals in makeshift replicas of their garb. These followers were resurrecting the ceremony, restoring the platform, arraying broadcasters and vibrators, etching the precise configurations from the initial spectacle. Their means were scant, their grasp fragmentary. They pieced it together from splintered recollections, tainted archives, and the garbled mutterings of eyewitnesses who had endured the climax with psyches only somewhat preserved. Still, their zeal burned unwavering, their commitment to flawless perception and flawless immersion unwaned by the rite's prior collapse. These zealots convinced themselves that the Legion had merely erred in some trivial aspect of delivery, some slight imperfection in the orchestration that they could pinpoint and amend. Day by day, I tracked their toil as they methodically pieced back the makings of disaster, devoid of the Legion's vast assets, their warp-infused craftsmanship, their superhuman prowess. They made up for it through sheer volume, through zealotry, through readiness to expend any resource or life required for success. I realized I ought to depart, withdraw to my haven, and await the foreordained collapse of their endeavor. No mortals could replicate the Legion's audacious bid, could harness the powers they had wielded. These enthusiasts faced, at minimum, bitter letdown, at maximum, gruesome demise. Yet I lingered, urged by the identical compulsion to document that had propelled me from the outset. Having traced the Legion's endeavor from inception to ruinous end, I required this coda, this mortal sequel to their otherworldly opus. The enthusiasts finalized their setup and launched their enactment, a wan echo of the first climax. Their score clashed harshly, missing the warp-laced chords that had rendered the Legion's opus so mesmerizing, so alchemical. Their ceremonies stumbled awkwardly. Based on flawed interpretations and distorted recollections, I observed, anticipating the unavoidable instant when their shortcomings would surface, when their appropriated style would crumble beneath the unyielding pressure of true circumstances. Even so, as their enactment persisted, I detected an alteration, a subtle shift in the atmosphere's glow, in the way echoes traveled. These ardent novices were accomplishing a feat, not the grand unveiling that the Legion had pursued, not the total erosion of the barrier dividing worlds, but a limited triumph, a slight erosion, a modest tear in the weave of being. Over their improvised platform, the atmosphere started to quiver, to undulate in motifs echoing the initial breach, hues twisted, shapes emerged and vanished, and amid this turmoil, an otherworldly presence peered through. It acknowledged their dedication, their zeal. I sensed its focus, its scrutiny gliding across the clustered devotees, across the devastated metropolis outside, and momentarily across my vantage point. Once more, I endured that dreadful instant of insight, of perception transcending the limits of mortal cognition. The being knew of this realm, this urban sprawl. The Legion's endeavors had branded it, had rendered it discernible beyond the divides of dimensions, and although the initial ceremony had faltered, had been dismissed as flawed, the mark lingered. The link, faint as it was, endured. The followers perceived it as well, this awareness. They reacted with mounting intensity, their actions growing more desperate, their cries more vehement. Certain individuals started to mutate, their forms reacting to the nearness of warp energies, to the entity's gaze they aimed to invoke. Yet these changes weren't the deliberate cosmetic alterations the Legion had executed. They were disorderly, unrestrained, agonizing. Tissue melted like fluid, reconfigured into erratic forms, skeletons cracked and remolded, vital parts relocated, malfunctioned, yielded to apparatuses fulfilling mysterious functions. I beheld in revulsion as the ceremony devolved into carnage, as devotees assaulted one another, propelled by instincts beyond their mastery, by cravings they couldn't articulate. The mayhem radiated from the core platform, engulfing the whole assembly in a delirium of perception and ruin. And amid the chaos, the fissure persisted, diminutive yet enduring, a portal via which the being kept watching, meddling, tainting. It wouldn't materialize, wouldn't cross into our plane bodily as the Legion had envisioned, but its essence would register. Its sway would propagate, borne by the remnants of this botched rite, by the forces liberated in their endeavor. I withdrew, then escaped to my refuge, to the refuge of narcotic mists and mechanical clamor. Yet I grasped with grim assurance that the spectacle I'd seen marked not a conclusion, but an inception. The Legion had vanished, their ambitious scheme shattered, but they had bequeathed adherents, faithful souls, mortals who had sampled the pinnacles of perception and would devote their days to reclaiming that thrill. They would attempt anew. Maybe not in this place, maybe not imminently, but elsewhere, inevitably, the effort would recur. The formula would be honed, the mistakes rectified, and in time, conceivably, the shroud would fully divide. The being would appear in its utter splendor and terror. I persist in my vigilance, my chronicling. I commit to record my sightings, my insights, in the wish that another will uncover this account, will heed its caution. The Legion has exited our domain, but their inheritance lingers. Their blight endures in the psyches and physiques of those they influenced, those they reshaped. I am Jorvan Hale, the sole survivor of their gaze, the ultimate sentinel. My frame carries the scars of their craftsmanship, my thoughts the echo of their deity's notice. I survive now to chronicle, to recall, to alert. The Emperor's children inflicted flawless dread upon our realm, a taint so thorough, so unyielding, that it altered the essence of reality itself. They crafted a triumph from our torment, a chorus from our agonies. And although their creation fell short of its supreme intent, its reverberations will echo through the warp forever, a alluring summons to seekers of perceptual boundaries, to adorers at the shrine of ecstasy. Heed the minions of the Lord of Delight, shun their allure, their mastery, their vow of flawless immersion. For within their flawlessness dwells the origin of every vice, every downfall, in their accord, the demise of everything. I am Jorvan Hale, I behold the chorus of sinew, and I shall uphold that vision until my dying gasp, until the final tone of my life dissolves into quiet. Since witnessing the devotees' botched ceremony those months ago, I have detected shifts in my altered form. The alterations wrought by the Legion's artisans, unfinished though they were, keep progressing, keep my body adjusts in gradual, understated shifts, reacting to impulses beyond my deliberate awareness. My perceptions have grown keener than any ordinary person's, enabling me to notice subtle fluctuations in illumination and noise that ought to escape detection. In my sleep, visions brim with melodies unfamiliar to my ears and hues beyond my ability to describe upon rising. I dread the implications of these alterations, the entity I could evolve into should this progression remain unhindered. Still, I sense an odd receptivity within myself, bordering on intrigue. The Legion aim to forge me into a vessel, a tool for their deity's emergence. Rather, I've transformed into a hybrid, neither wholly mortal nor utterly tainted, a spectator whose essence hovers on the cusp of existence's divides. This might explain my endurance amid the downfall of countless others. This intermediary condition, this liminal way of being, perhaps equips me to witness and grasp what would shatter minds or inspire devotion in the rest. I linger on the brink of insight, gazing equally into the depths of mortal anguish and the drive of the unearthly, discerning both with unflinching precision. The metropolis presses on with its gradual metamorphosis, molding itself to the fallout from the Legion's incursion. Fresh sects have arisen, each offering its distinct reading of the events, each devising its method for grappling with the stain of corruption left behind. Certain groups pursue purification, embracing practices of self-denial and ascetic rigor to oppose the indulgences the Legion exalted. Others welcome the metamorphosis, hailing their distortions as blessings, as steps toward an elevated form of life. The majority navigate a middle path, merely striving to endure in a reality irrevocably changed, indelibly marked by encounters with powers defying mortal grasp. They reconstruct their dwellings, their societies, their existences, navigating the skeletal frameworks of the Legion's ambitious architecture, acclimating to the persistent repercussions of warp influence on their surroundings, their forms, their psyches. I've started engaging more openly with these remnants of humanity, tentatively initially, then with growing assurance, realizing that my modified state doesn't isolate me, but elevates me in their eyes. They regard me as one selected, shaped by the Legion's direct touch, one who endured the climax of their pivotal ceremony. Some hail me as a seer, craving counsel or direction. Others view me as an artifact, a tangible link to an episode now woven into local legends. A handful perceive my true role, a chronicler, a watcher, a chronicler of the past and the persisting saga. To these, I confide without restraint, divulging my visions, my insights, my apprehensions. In exchange, they offer their personal accounts, their encounters, aiding me in assembling a fuller chronicle of the Legion's influence and the enduring ripples of their visitation. Among them stands a woman called Vaiyan, formerly a scholar at our foremost academic institution, who has evolved into a close ally. She weathered the Legion's takeover concealed in the university's underground vaults, encircled by documents and annals that meant nothing to entities fixated only on raw feeling and immediacy. They grasped nothing of genuine erudition. In one of our exchanges, she remarked, quote 42, "Her insights enabled me to frame my experiences, to situate the Legion's deeds within a structure that rendered them intelligible, however appalling. They were creators of the utmost radicalism." As she elaborated, expression severed from symbolism or intent, focused purely on resonance, on consequence. They aspired to craft sensations so profound, so consuming, that they would fracture the bedrock of existence itself, permitting their God to enter the physical plane unmediated. Yet they faltered, I pointed out, and this time she concurred. Here, in this locale, though they shall endeavor anew. It's inherent to their essence, their mission, and every foray draws them nearer to triumph, revealing more about the veils separating worlds, about the prerequisites for incarnation. Her pronouncements unsettled me, echoing my own anxieties regarding tomorrow, not merely for our realm, but for every sphere scarred by the Legion's poisonous reach. Yet they also bolstered my determination to persist in my vigilance, my archiving. Should the peril linger, should another bid arise, then the alert must endure, must radiate outward from our secluded sphere. Vaiyan and I commenced collaborating, merging her archival expertise with my direct testimonies. We collected narratives from fellow survivors, cross-referencing viewpoints, discerning trends, forging a thorough dossier on the Legion's dominion and its lingering shadow. We founded a modest repository in the atmospheric processi, We operated from a secluded processing plant, leveraging its remote position and inherent chemical safeguards to shield our efforts from anyone intent on burying our discoveries, preferring to perpetuate the swelling legends about the Legion's role over confronting the intricate, horrifying reality. Additional allies gradually aligned with us, contributing their specialized knowledge and viewpoints. One, a retired tech priest whose cybernetic enhancements had been altered by chaotic warp influences, aided in deciphering the engineering side of the Legion's endeavors, the apparatuses and instruments designed to channel and intensify warp forces. Another, a healer compelled to participate in the Legion's alteration procedures, offered details on the bodily alterations, the genetic manipulations that converted ordinary people into tools, into elements of an overarching scheme. Collectively, we assembled a fuller picture of the events that transpired and those persisting in the wake of the disaster. The Legion's ambition extended beyond merely invoking their deity or manifesting it in our material plane. They aimed to reshape existence entirely, to forge a realm where the divides between realms remained forever porous, where perceptions and encounters could achieve levels of fervor unattainable within conventional physics. Their downfall stemmed from flawed execution, not flawed vision. The frameworks they had laid down, the vibrations they had generated, proved inherently viable. Yet a misstep in the ultimate execution, perhaps in sequence, configuration, or synchronization, had prompted their god to spurn the tribute, to retract its emergence. This realization evoked a mix of optimism and gloom. Optimism, since it implied that such summonings demanded exacting prerequisites, ones that could prove challenging to recreate. Gloom, as it validated the feasibility of the endeavor, indicating that triumph hinged merely on adjustments, on rectifying the precise mistake committed. As our investigations pressed on and our records expanded, we detected shifts in the urban landscape and among the inhabitants. The sects were merging. Minor factions getting subsumed into dominant ones, disputes over beliefs being settled or quashed. Fresh authorities were rising, figures asserting personal links to the being the Legion had venerated, claiming insight into the miscalculations of the climactic rite and how to amend them. They dubbed themselves the Choir of Perfection, amassing adherents, supplies, and sway. Their overseers donned garments in violet and auric hues, their features hidden by exquisite masks, each portraying a mortal face at the peak of rapturous insight. They navigated the metropolis with increasing assurance, enlisting eagerly, vowing sublime transcendence to recruits. We monitored them remotely via the web of spies and watchers we'd cultivated. Initially, their ceremonies were understated, centered on melody and gesture, crafting profound yet restrained encounters. Over time, however, they integrated facets of the Legion's methods, refined and tailored for mortal devotees, mortal vessels. They're constructing toward a climax, Varian noted while we sifted through updates from our sources, laying the groundwork, the core motifs, yet methodically, incrementally acclimating those involved to the thrills and ordeals. I acknowledged the accuracy of her evaluation. The Legion had rushed ahead, enforcing their blueprint on an unready populace, subjecting them to such radical sensory upheavals and breaches of natural order. The choir adopted a steadier strategy, nurturing consenting followers, nurturing the prerequisites for their ceremony across months or years instead of mere days or weeks. We must alert somebody, I urged, an authority outside our sphere, one equipped to step in. Vian appeared doubtful. The Imperium. They'd eradicate the whole populace indiscriminately, perceiving nothing but defilement and contamination, and they'd hold some justification for it. We're all imprinted by what unfolded here, all altered in manifest and hidden manners. Then, to whom can we appeal? She offered no reply, nor could I. We persisted with our vigilance and recording, despite the choir's mounting authority and reach, despite their ceremonies evolving into grander, fiercer spectacles, more attuned to the Legion's original configurations. We also spotted subtler transformations, potentially more profound. The warp tempests encircling our planet since the botched apex were fading. The veils separating our existence from the warp were fortifying, not eroding. Links to distant sectors, severed right after the ceremony, were regaining viability in principle, although we possessed no tools to exploit this shift. "They're biding their time," Vian proposed as I highlighted these findings. "The presence, the sovereign they revere, it's pulling back under its straightforward impact. The barrier separating dimensions began to mend itself, to fortify, not driven by compassion or apathy, but because an authentic invocation, a true emergence, demands the shattering of thresholds, not their abuse. It must be welcomed, not compelled to breach." The message rang true. The choir's endeavors, its methodical layering of motifs and vibrations, served as groundwork for a fresh bid at embodiment, another peak. Yet this round, the setup would prove more restrained, the involved parties better equipped, the delivery sharper. We intensified our recording, our analysis, our crafting of alerts for any future arrivals to our realm. We set up various repositories, stashing duplicates of our findings across the urban sprawl and nearby areas, boosting the odds that at least one account would endure the impending storm. While we labored, my own shifts persisted, unfolding. The alterations initiated by the Legion kept advancing at a measured pace. My form was adjusting to an intention I couldn't wholly grasp, yet I sensed it inching toward fruition. Silence now carried melodies to my ears, voids revealed structures to my eyes, and I detected entities lurking outside the physical plane. Virion spotted these developments, observing me with a blend of analytical intrigue and personal worry. "Quote 44, she remarked. Quote 45. I had no rebuttal. I inhabited a threshold realm now. My awareness stretched past typical mortal limits. My grasp included ideas that ought to defy comprehension. I was evolving into a superior recorder, a fuller sentinel, capable of detecting and noting facets of existence hidden from the rest. This shift yielded fresh revelations, altered views on the Legion's prior endeavor, and the choir's current buildup. I discerned the motifs with greater clarity, decoded the underlying equations and frequencies in their ceremonies, their alterations, their constructs. I detected the vibrations they set up, how these rippled across tangible existence and the immaterial beyond. And I felt the presence observing, biding its time, its gaze locked on our planet with unhurried craving, with flawless expectancy for the events ahead. The choir's build-up quickened, their ceremonies growing more intricate, more overt. They started erecting a fresh arena, modest compared to the Legion's vast edifice, yet crafted with exacting detail, its sound properties and shapes honed from lessons of the botched peak. Locals were enlisted, now as eager recruits instead of prisoners, ready to embrace the changes, the tweaks, the practice runs for the ultimate show. They endured operations, medicinal infusions, enhancements tainted by the warp. Their physiques slowly molded into the tools the ceremony demanded. We observed, we chronicled, we readied our alert. Yet more and more, I felt pulled toward hands-on scrutiny, toward nearer encounters with the choir's projects. My enhanced senses let me decode parts of their blueprint that eluded my team, to fathom the entire aim and reach of their creation. One evening, defying Varion's counsel, I slipped into the core of the choir's domain, to the half-built arena where their boldest ceremonies unfolded. I hid within a utility passage, employing my modified intuition to slip past the divides between me and the main hall to behold the happenings inside. What unfolded there validated our gravest suspicions. The choir had rebuilt the core components of the Legion's blueprint, fixing the flaws that prompted its dismissal. Their knowledge stayed partial, their rollout constrained by mortal limits and supplies, but the core motif held firm, the foundational vibrations intact. At the arena's heart loomed a silhouette I knew, unseen by me for more than a year. The maestro, the Legion's leader, who had orchestrated the initial peak. He had outlasted the downfall, the spurning, the retreat of his deity's blessing. His flawless visage had vanished, supplanted by a nightmarish mosaic of traits that writhed and morphed as I observed. His plating lay in tatters, more vital than fabricated now, merged with his skin in ways that defied mobility, much less the exact motions he executed. Yet it was undeniably him, steering the choir's labors, shaping their ceremonies, mending their missteps, polishing their methods. He had lurked in shadows until this point, letting mortal stand-ins lay the groundwork, amass the materials and recruits essential. Only with the setup ripe enough did he step forth, seizing command of the closing phases. I observed as I oversaw a practice session, a segment of the impending climax that would redefine everything. The melody was stunning, yet horrifying, its chords reaching frequencies I could now detect, but lacked words to capture in mortal terms. The performers glided with an almost otherworldly elegance, their enhanced forms reacting to the leader's signals with flawless accuracy and unity. Over the main platform, the atmosphere started to waver, undulating in formations familiar from the initial ceremony. Yet this anomaly was managed, restrained, a purposeful attenuation instead of a tear. Via this veil, I felt once more the being's scrutiny, its focus sharpened, purposeful, assessing the setup with discerning approval. I stayed through the end of the drill until the group scattered and the leader retreated to his hidden refuge. Afterward, I headed back to our repository, to Varian and the team, to share my observations. They heard me out quietly, faces turning sterner as I outlined the leader's endurance, his guidance of the singer's work, and how far along their arrangements had advanced. "How much time?" Varian inquired once I'd wrapped up. "How soon before they launch the complete ceremony, the fresh peak?" I reflected on the display, on the sense of their advancement and preparedness. "A few weeks," I replied at last, "maybe a month at most, nothing beyond. They're almost set, on the verge. The formations are locked in, the performers trained, the tools calibrated. Only the last polish remains, the ideal synchronization of every part. And soon, they'll try once more what the Legion pursued, to forge a lasting portal across dimensions, to let their deity appear wholly in our physical plane. This round, I suspect they might pull it off. The consequences lingered unspoken among us, fully grasped. Victory for them would spell doom for our reality as we recognize it, a shift into an existence defying human grasp, beyond endurance. Even a partial triumph, a constrained emergence would unleash decay and agony beyond our wildest fears. "We must halt them," a team member declared, shattering the quiet. "We need to devise a method to interfere with the ceremony and block the emergence." Responses varied. Some assented with nods, others dismissed the idea as unfeasible. The singers had swelled to thousands, backed by vast means and sway, their domain heavily guarded. At the core, steering it all, was a post-human fighter, a veteran Legion officer versed for ages in combat and warp sorcery. "How do we challenge that might?" another wondered. "What odds do we stand of prevailing where the Imperium itself stumbled?" I pondered the query, drawing on my sightings and insights from my evolved senses. The Legion's downfall stemmed not from Empire opposition or mortal meddling. It arose from flaws in their blueprint, their carrying out. The power they revered tolerated no less than flawlessness, spurning any deviation from that unattainable ideal. Quote, 48. I stated deliberately, the strategy crystallizing in my words. We just need to guarantee another shortfall, that their ceremony misses the mark of flawlessness. A tiny mistake, a subtle interference at a pivotal instant, might prompt their deity to scorn the tribute and pull back its presence. "How?" Varian pressed. Quote 49. I pressed my hand to my torso, sensing the alterations under my flesh, the ongoing shifts weaving through my being. I explained. I formed part of their initial blueprint, designed as a vital piece in the first peak. My change was halted midway, unfinished, yet it persists today, edging toward some fated conclusion. Realization lit in Vian's gaze. "You'd slip inside their ranks," she ventured. "Offer yourself as a devoted member, a prized asset for the ceremony thanks to your prior changes." Precisely, I'd let them finish what the Legion started, to weave me into their framework as originally planned. But at the decisive juncture, as the portal starts to form, I'd weave in a jarring note, a defect in the weave. Silence enveloped the space as they weighed my idea, its perils, the faint prospect of victory, the toll it demanded. "You'd perish," Varian concluded at length. "Even should you manage to derail the ceremony, the recoil would obliterate you, just as it almost did the leader and his fighters in the prior collapse." I understand, I conceded. But how does one life weigh against our entire realm, against the myriad souls that would perish, twist, or mutate if the ceremony prevails? None could counter that. Not even Vian. We SI spent the rest of that evening perfecting our strategy, pinpointing the ideal instant for my interference to disrupt the ceremony's flawless rhythm. Come morning, I departed our hideout for good, heading into the choir's realm, straight to the amphitheater where their latest surge was set to unfold. I brought no gear along, figuring I wouldn't need it for a trek from which survival seemed unlikely. My sole item was a compact datapad holding every detail of our logs, our insights, breakdowns, and alerts for any future seekers. I'd stash it en route, bolstering the hidden repositories we'd scattered across the urban sprawl. The path wound me through zones untouched since the Legion pulled out, neighborhoods once pivotal to their vast scheme, home to their flashiest spectacles and wildest trials. The buildings stayed warped, featuring bizarre tilts and alien shapes that strained the eyes, yet greenery was starting to encroach in spots. Creepers and molds sprawled across bent facades, plants evolved to thrive amid residual chaos forces sprouted from fissures in tainted rock. Venturing further into the old Legion grounds, now claimed by the choir, I started running into sentries. Squads of hooded shapes advanced in eerie unison, a hallmark of the choir's devotion. I made no effort to conceal myself or slip past unnoticed. Rather, I strode in plain sight, letting my changed physique show, inviting acknowledgement of its origins. The initial group that noticed me bristled with tension, guns lifting, shouts issuing demands. But upon nearer inspection, as they grasped the essence of my alterations, their aggression shifted toward awe. They closed in warily, with one breaking off to confront me personally. "You carry the Legion's imprint," he declared, his tone warped by the visor covering his features and tweaks to his larynx, enabling tones no standard voice could muster. "You played a role in the initial surge." "Indeed," I acknowledged, deeming deception pointless. "They shaped me as a tool for their grand composition, but the composition halted unfinished when the rite collapsed." The squad chief consulted quietly with his team through hand signals and faint pitch shifts instead of speech. Then he faced me again. "You'll accompany us," he stated. "The director will want to assess how you might add to the upcoming show." I let them guide me across the choir's holdings, by clusters of followers readying for the imminent ceremony. Some drilled intricate dances, their forms weaving motions that bent the air nearby. Others chanted, augmented larynges emitting resonances that synced with the structures, making walls and beams hum in echo. A few more submitted to operations, surgeries conducted in exposed tents, serving as both exhibit and lesson for upcoming converts. The amphitheater loomed ahead, less immense than the Legion's Colossus, but crafted with sharper intent, its dimensions following numeric harmonies I could now sense and interpret, ones bridging physical laws and chaotic fluxes. Its outside appeared plainly stark, masking the intricate wonders inside. They ushered me along a maze of corridors, each crafted to attune thoughts and perceptions for the core, each tweaking awareness via sound waves, strategic plays of illumination and darkness, and sense-provoking targeted brain reactions. Upon entering the heart room, my enhanced faculties sharpened further, my perception stretching past usual bounds. The space formed an ideal echo chamber, a globe lined with substances that seized and bounced audio with uncanny accuracy. Benched levels encircled a focal stage, positioned so each viewer enjoyed clear sightlines and prime sound immersion. Suspended over the stage were gem-like formations that snared and splintered rays, forming visuals that amplified the sonic aspects of the event. Atop the stage waited the director, the same Legion officer I'd watched leading the practice. Viewed intimately, his metamorphosis struck as even more evident, more grotesque. His frame embodied endurance, fueled purely by resolve, a patchwork of mismatched parts, bound solely by unyielding purpose. His plating, melded to his skin, glided with fluid elegance despite its bulk and stiffness. His visage, if such a term still fit, remained in perpetual flux. His form shifted fluidly, patterns swirling and reshaping without ever settling into a fixed shape. He pivoted toward us upon our arrival, his focus locking onto me with an almost tangible sharpness. The weight of his stare pressed against me like a tangible weight, scrutinizing, assessing, gauging what value I might bring. Quote 56. He intoned, his voice weaving a chorus of pitches that echoed through the room. Quote 57. He drew nearer, circling me deliberately, inspecting my changed body from every side. One claw-like hand, far from anything human, extended to follow the designs etched into my skin. The alteration started but left unfinished in the initial surge. Intriguing, he whispered. The process persists on its own, devoid of instruction, lacking intent. The design advances independently, evolving through adaptation alone. Remarkable. Finishing his loop, he positioned himself in front of me once more, his ever-changing visage briefly forming a look of approval. You shall take part in our symphony, he announced. Your changes, though unfinished, add a crucial element to our group, and your involvement, your role brings a satisfying balance, a link to the first creation that could ground the fresh arrangement and foster the essential vibrations. I lowered my gaze, pretending deference, compliance. I shall obey, I replied, selecting my phrasing with precision. I shall add to the unity of the collective. The maestro appeared content with my yielding, though his fluctuating face made it hard to confirm. He motioned to the squad captain who had brought me there. Quote 58, he commanded. Quote 59. They guided me out of the hall into a medical tent, an area set aside for converting willing subjects into the tools needed for the climax. Healer specialists, their forms enhanced for accuracy and stamina, stood ready with instruments blending the sterility of medical tools and the creativity of an artist's kit. I yielded to their care, permitting them to advance the efforts started by the Legion's creators. They examined the existing designs, the prior changes, and built upon them using plans from the maestro. Fresh cuts followed the traces already marked on my body. Implants were placed beneath the skin, gadgets meant to boost and guide the forces flowing in the ceremony. Nerve bundles were adjusted, senses sharpened, voice mechanisms reshaped to hit certain pitches. All the while, I stayed awake, my modified system letting me withstand agony that would crush an unaltered person. I watched the operations with cool curiosity, marking the contrasts between the chorus's methods and those I recalled from the Legion's efforts. The chorus's style was sharper, more restrained, yet missing the chaotic flair that had rendered the Legion's work so potent, so revolutionary. Weeks slipped by as the labor pressed on, each treatment layering over the last, steadily molding me into the device essential for the climax. In the intervals, I stayed among fellow altered recruits, others in the upcoming event who had faced comparable shifts. They said little, their focus turned inside to the transformations reshaping their forms and thoughts. Yet when words came, they touched on the impending rite, the elevating bliss it vowed, the privilege of acting as channels for their deity's arrival. Their belief was unwavering, their commitment total. They had surrendered entirely to the chorus's goal, the maestro's dream. I heard them out. I watched closely. I collected details that could support my scheme to interrupt the ceremony. I discovered the framework of the updated piece, the exact function of each changed member, the key instance when the divide between worlds grew frailest, most open to interference. And while the setup went forward, as the climax's time neared, I sensed shifts inside me separate from the chorus healer's additions. The design from the Legion, paused yet never halted, kept its gradual progression, adjusting to the fresh changes, weaving them into a broader scheme I could feel but not grasp completely. I started having flashes of heightened awareness, short bursts where my senses stretched past the physical world, where I could glimpse the warp itself, detect the beings gliding through it. These moments passed quickly, leaving me unsteady, but each granted fresh revelations, deeper grasp of the energies at play, the strengths the chorus aimed to. At last, the pivotal day dawned. The amphitheater stood ready, its every inch polished and sanctified, its sound qualities meticulously calibrated for optimal effect. We participants, including me, received the last tweaks, fine-tuning to guarantee flawless synchronization and vibration. We took our places in exact formations across and near the main stage, each spot chosen to boost personal input while enhancing the overall impact. The spectators started streaming in, settling into the stepped rows and circling us. These were the choir's devoted followers, faithful ones, spared the complete alterations needed for hands-on involvement, yet poised to act as observers and boosters for the forces stirred in the ceremony. Their attendance, their responses, would weave into the piece, infusing depths of feeling and intensity to the core enactment. The leader emerged final, ascending from a hidden space below the stage to claim his spot at the heart of our array. His altered form appeared steadier now, more restrained, like he'd summoned every last shred of resolve and strength for this ultimate display. His ever-changing visage paused momentarily in a mask of concentration, resolve, utter certainty. "Today," he proclaimed to us, his words echoing across the venue and vibrating through our enhanced frames, "we finalize the endeavor that started long ago. Today, we refine the imperfections. Today, we usher our deity into the physical world, not as a fleeting guest or brief apparition, but as an enduring entity, a genuine embodiment." He lifted his arms, the motion marking the ritual's launch, the onset of the ultimate swell. United, we launched into the act, each of us delivering our designated role to the grand design. Every one of us directed powers as per the blueprint honed over weeks of practice. The melody surging from our unified labor eluded words, surpassing everyday notions of melody and accord. It wove in aspects beyond typical senses, tones that vibrated with the essence of existence, with the divides across realms. As it swelled in intricacy and force, I sensed the area nearby starting to alter, to bend and stretch as the barrier between planes grew fragile. Over the stage, the atmosphere gleamed, undulated, twisted inward in shapes defying logic. Shades emerged outside the usual sight range, tints that evoked sentiments instead of mere light rays. The crowd reacted, their feedback looping back to enrich the work, layering in waves of awareness and encounter that deepened and intensified the main motifs. I executed my duty with exactness, rooting powers via my altered physique just as directed, feeding into the accord that was steadily, relentlessly, forging a bridge across dimensions. I perceived the being's focus zeroing in on our ceremony, on our tribute, evaluating its caliber, its flawlessness, with the discerning eye of an expert beholding a masterpiece of unparalleled craft. And I bided my time for the decisive instant, the exact point where my interference would hit hardest, where one jarring tone would shatter the full arrangement, prompting the being to pull back its emergence, to spurn the tribute as it had dismissed the Legion's initial bid. The ceremony advanced, climbing to its peak, to the juncture where the barrier would fully yield, where the being would commence its physical arrival. The leader's gestures grew broader, more authoritative, guiding the energy streams with unerring accuracy, total mastery. Then arrived the instant I'd anticipated, the vital turning point as all pieces converged, the portal on the brink of total unveiling. I readied myself to inject chaos and break the meticulously crafted scheme. Yet as I braced for this closing move, this intentional undermining, something stirred deep inside. I sensed the framework from the Legion's early efforts, advanced through months of unchecked evolution, abruptly fulfilling itself, abruptly unveiling its authentic intent. The changes they'd initiated, halted short of finish, weren't meant to turn me into a mere channel, an inert tool in their orchestration. They'd been fashioning something richer, more autonomous, an element able of deliberate engagement, of aware input to the end result. I grasped then the reason for my endurance amid so many losses, the cause my shift had persisted sans direction or aim. I'd been crafted as a safeguard, a reserve mechanism to trigger if the main ceremony faltered. My progressing alterations, my broadening awareness, my deepening grasp of the powers at play, all had steered toward this juncture, this chance for inner intervention. But not the kind I had envisioned, not the mere sabotage that would merely unravel the ceremony once more. No, my altered form, my evolved essence, presented an alternative route, a third option amid triumph and defeat, amid summoning and dismissal. Rather than sowing chaos, I started to guide the surging forces within me along a fresh trajectory. It was a twist on the ritual's core motif, one that neither bolstered nor undermined it, but reshaped its intent and outcome. Via my reshaped physique, via the adaptations honed across months of change, I molded those forces into a structure that wouldn't forge a portal for arrival, but erect a wall, an enduring lockdown across dimensions. The leader picked up on the shift right away, his flawless command of the proceedings enabling him to spot even the slightest fluctuations in the energy streams. He pivoted in my direction, his mutable visage twisting into a mask of fury, of dawning terror. "No!" he bellowed, his shout slicing past the intricate symphony of the right. "You'll shatter it all. You'll wreck the flawless harmony we've built." He lunged at me, his transfigured frame gliding over the dais with unnatural velocity. His gifted limbs stretched out to halt me, to quash the novel rhythm I was weaving into the orchestration. Yet he arrived too tardily. The forces were already streaming under my influence. The ceremony was morphing from a call into a closure, from a welcome into an exile. Overhead on the dais, the rippling atmosphere, the budding portal, started to alter. Rather than widening, rather than parting to permit entry, it was tightening, compressing, coiling into a dense core of energy that throbbed with pent-up might. From it, I perceived the being's response, its fury and vexation as it grasped the unfolding truth. As it comprehended that entry to the physical plane was denied, that it was being driven deeper into seclusion within the immaterial void. The leader closed in, his gifted grasp clamping my neck, aiming to end my role in the right and block me from finalizing the design. But the momentum of those forces proved impossible to arrest so simply. They coursed via me, via him, via every altered figure involved, linking us in one last harrowing accord. Quote 62. The leader snarled, his tone a jarring blend of wrath and hopelessness. Quote 63. I couldn't retort, couldn't clarify that my contribution spelled not ruin but evolution, not annihilation, but a novel form of elevation. The forces amassing inside and surrounding us had hit a tipping point, a stage where guidance or alteration was out of reach. They would adhere to the blueprint I'd set, would finalize the process launched, no matter personal will or meddling. Overhead, the energy core throbbed once, twice, then burst forth in a surge of power that swallowed the whole arena. I sensed it sweep through me, through the leader, through each participant and bystander, propelling us into a void amid voids, a domain betwixt worlds. For a moment stretching into forever, I perceived being from an angle unbound by bodily bounds, by time's grip. I viewed our globe, our metropolis from afar. I discerned the webs of decay and sway that had taken root, the echoes tying it to the warp, to the being craving entry. And I watched those ties rupture, those echoes fracture, as the power surge radiated from the arena, sweeping across the metropolis, the world, purging the corruption sown, barricading the rifts torn between realms. Then, in one last rush of intensity, the surge recoiled, imploded inward, pulling every soul tied to the right, every presence in the arena, into a nexus of force and awareness that flickered from our plane, abandoning only void, only quiet. I can't say how long that limbo of non-existence endured, that limbo spanning dimensions. Time lost all hold, all import in our new state. We were force, awareness, design, dwelling in an expanse, neither physical domain nor immaterial expanse, but a distinct entity, a singular creation. The leader lingered there, along with all who'd joined the right, all who'd beheld it. We stood apart yet intertwined, distinct yet unified, tethered by our shared ordeal, by our shared metamorphosis. Some, the leader among them, fumed at this shift, this unforeseen result. Others welcomed it, discovering in this fresh state a transcendence they hadn't foreseen, yet could value all the same. I watched. I bore witness. I chronicled, persisting in the duty I'd taken up with the Legion's coming, from the outset of the metamorphosis of the planet. Yet my gaze now stretched further than the tangible world, past ordinary senses. I beheld the consequences of our vanishing, the impact of the barrier surge upon our realm, upon the urban expanse we'd abandoned. The taint persisted. The structural mutations to buildings and terrain endured. However, the link to the warp, the fraying boundary between dimensions, had been ruptured, barricaded, rendered impervious. The being's sway had vanished, its focus redirected, its fixation on our domain quenched by the downfall of its minions, by the unforeseen results of their ceremony. The inhabitants who endured, those who weathered both the Legion's dominion and the choir's machinations, gradually surfaced from their refuges, from the obscurity where they'd taken shelter. They encountered a metropolis devoid of peril and potential, a locale where the extraordinary had transpired yet wouldn't recur, where the terrors they'd endured were relegated to recollection, to chronicles instead of persistent actuality. They set about reconstructing, reclaiming, reconfiguring their surroundings to align with mortal requirements, mortal aspirations, rather than the motif of decay, the edifice of extravagance. They forged fresh settlements, fresh administrations, fresh creeds that recognized the events but emphasized restoration, endurance, the horizon over the bygone. And in time, outsiders arrived, forces from the Imperium lured by the hush of a formerly submissive sphere, by the halt in all transmissions, all offerings. They discovered a populace altered by their ordeals, scarred by encounters with powers defying mortal grasp. They uncovered a metropolis carrying the tangible marks of decay, of warp intrusion, of blasphemous deeds. Their reaction was predictable, unavoidable under the Imperium's tenets, its unyielding rejection of aberration, of pollution. Flames sanctified the metropolis, eradicated every vestige of the Legion's incursion, the choir's endeavors. Those residents unable to prove their innocence, their defiance against taint, were encompassed in this sanctification, this refinement by inferno. A fresh metropolis ascended from the embers. A fresh populace was relocated. A fresh overseer appointed. Annals were modified, chronicles revised, the verity of the happenings obscured beneath veils of suppression, of enforced forgetfulness decreed from on high. Yet certain traces lingered, certain accounts of reality. The repositories Varian and I had founded, secreted across the former metropolis and its environs, persisted in fragments. Some were unearthed by the newcomers, scrutinized, then obliterated as hazardous, as possible wellsprings of pollution, but others stayed concealed, safeguarded under debris or in locked vaults, awaiting one with the boldness, the inquisitiveness to uncover them, to peruse them, to comprehend what transpired on this sphere. And we lingered too, we who were pulled into that void between dimensions, that state betwixt states, neither vital in the usual manner nor deceased by customary measures, but enduring, abiding, beholding. The orchestrator and his fiercest adherents ultimately discovered a means to depart this condition, to re-enter the warp, to reunite with the being they'd obeyed, embracing whatever chastisement, whatever role it might assign to such botched vassals. Others elected to stay, discovering in this threshold state a measure of serenity, of meaning that had escaped them in corporeal existence. They evolved into sentinels like me, chroniclers of time's current, of history's advance, of the gradual mending of gashes carved into the weave of being by the Legion's trials, the choir's incantations. As for myself, I persist as I started, as a registrar, a narrator, a guardian of verity in a domain where verity bends, where actuality yields to viewpoint and analysis. I observe, I recall, I safeguard the awareness of what transpired, of how perilously our sphere neared becoming a portal for presences defying mortal ken, defying mortal endurance. And at times, when alignments converge, when conduits flicker open betwixt our condition and corporeal actuality, I extend. I brush the psyches of those who could grasp, who might wield the insight I provide to avert akin incidents, akin pollutions. I murmur cautions, I impart recollections, I grant visions of the reality beneath the polished narratives, the sanctioned reports. I am Jorvin. Salutations to the ultimate sentinel, the enduring beholder. My form has dissolved, converted to vitality, to schema, to awareness devoid of shape, but my mission endures, my duty proceeds. I testify to the chorus of tissue, to the exquisite dread delivered by the Emperor's children, to the blight that echoed long after their exodus. And I shall persist in testifying, in cautioning, in safeguarding the verity until the ultimate tone of being dissolves into quietude, until the concluding harmony of actuality settles into whatever lies past the terminus of all creation.